Hello, my name's Lowell Darnell. I'm 78, a widowed father from Eugene, Oregon, and this past Christmas, I found out I was worth $8.3 million just before realizing my daughter and her husband had already made plans for it. Without me. They didn't argue. They smiled. They rearranged my furniture, erased me from family photos, called me paranoid in church groups, and installed a camera in my kitchen. But the worst part wasn't what they said, it was what they never had to say aloud. The plan was already in motion. They had a file, a script, even a forged doctor's note. They were going to declare me incompetent, then call it care. How do you fight betrayal when it's disguised as concern? It was Christmas Eve, and the house was quieter than I'd ever known it. I stood at the stove, stirring gravy that didn't need stirring, pretending it was for flavor, not nerves. Margaret used to hum while she cooked, something old and slow from her childhood in Kentucky. But tonight, the silence was heavy, the kind that wraps around your ribs and presses until breathing feels optional. I glanced at the time, nearly 6. Celeste said they'd be here by then. I looked around the living room. Table was set. Ham was warming in the oven. A small tree stood in the corner, its lights blinking like it was trying to stay cheerful for me. This was my first Christmas without Margaret. She'd been gone 8 months, and every ornament we owned seemed to carry her handwriting or a memory I wasn't ready for. The sound of tires on gravel snapped me back. They were here. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, straightened my sweater, and opened the door. "Dad," Celeste said, pulling me into a stiff hug. Her husband Travis followed, holding the coats like he was arriving at a hotel, not his father-in-law's modest home. Brenna trailed behind them, earbuds in, only half present. "Hey, Grandpa," she said with a small smile, the only warmth in the room. We settled in. Dinner began. I asked about work, about school, about anything to keep things moving. Travis talked too much, Celeste too little. Brenna just nodded. It was a dance I knew well, me keeping the tempo, them tolerating the music. And then came the moment. I was clearing plates when my briefcase, perched too close to the table's edge, tipped. Papers spilled out, dozens of them. A stack of legal documents, neatly clipped, now lay exposed across the hardwood. Travis bent down. "Whoa, what's all this?" Before I could say a word, his eyes landed on the top page. He froze. His mouth opened, then closed. Celeste leaned over his shoulder. Her gaze narrowed. "Is that—" Travis started. But it didn't matter. They'd both seen the number. $8. 356, 240.62. The inheritance. Harold's estate. My brother had no wife. No kids. Just me. And that's where it all went when the probate cleared. I crouched down to scoop the papers. But my hands moved slower than my shame. "You didn't tell us," Celeste said, voice clipped. "I didn't think—" I started. $8 million. And you didn't think to mention it?" The air thickened. The turkey cooled on our plates. My throat felt dry, and suddenly the warmth of the house felt stifling. "I hadn't decided what to do yet," Travis chuckled, but it wasn't a laugh. "Guess box stuffing was a budget choice." His fork scraped across his plate. Celeste didn't meet my eyes. The moment shifted, subtle, but irreversible. The family meal turned into something else. The questions unspoken, but loud. What would I do with that money? Did I think I needed it? Was I hoarding it? I tried to steer the conversation back, asked Brenna about her music, tried to compliment her hair. But the warmth had drained. My daughter was distant. Her husband was calculating. And my granddaughter looked uncomfortable in a way I hadn't seen before. We moved to dessert. Travis leaned back, sipped his coffee. "Well," he said, smiling with too many teeth, "guess Santa left something big under your tree this year." The joke hung in the air like smoke. I smiled weakly. Then I saw it. The way he shifted his chair. Just a little. Just enough to lean forward and command the space, like he was already claiming it. Celeste didn't stop him. She didn't say a word. And in that moment, with gravy cooling and tinsel shimmering in the corner, I realized something was changing. Not tonight. Maybe. But soon. And not in a way I'd want. The house hadn't changed. Same hallway. Same creaky step by the kitchen. Same ticking clock on the mantel. But something about it now felt different. I couldn't sleep. Not from age. Not from indigestion. No. What kept me awake was that chair. Just a few inches. The way Travis had leaned back, like he was testing how far he could push without resistance, Margaret would have caught it. She always caught the smallest shift in a room. I stepped carefully over the hardwood floor, making my way toward the kitchen. The lights were dim, just the glow above the stove humming quietly. The smell of ham and onions still lingered in the air, but without warmth now, just a trace of something that used to be good. I poured a glass of water and leaned on the counter, wondering how we got here. A soft creak came from above, then murmurs, muffled. The guest room was directly over the kitchen. I held my breath. Travis's voice carried, not loud, but sharp. "He doesn't deserve that kind of money," he said, low and slow. "I'm telling you, elder protection laws are designed for this exact thing. Capacity evaluations, financial oversight. We can position it right." My hand tightened around the glass. Celeste responded, quieter, but not hesitant. "We have to be careful. He's not stupid." I stood there, frozen, not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't about hurt feelings or inheritance etiquette. This was a strategy session. My daughter and her husband were mapping out how to unseat me from my own life, and they didn't even have the decency to whisper far enough from the vents. I backed away from the counter, glass still half full. I moved through the shadows like a man in someone else's home. Back to the study. I hadn't touched the printer in days. No reason to. But its tray light was blinking red. I pressed the button. Out slid a crumpled sheet of paper, caught awkwardly in the feed. Half of it printed, the other half smudged. I smoothed it on the desk under the lamp. The header read, "Urgent. Guidance for establishing guardianship. Elder assets involved." Below it, an email draft, unfinished, but the name in the sender's box. Celeste Anderson. The room spun slightly, not from vertigo, from the way a memory punches you behind the eyes. She used to leave me notes in my briefcase when she was 9. "You're the best dad. I saved you a cookie." Now she was drafting legal maneuvers to have me declared mentally unfit. I didn't tear the paper. I didn't throw it away. I folded it once, slowly, and placed it inside the old leather journal Margaret gave me on our 40th anniversary. She had always said, "If something's worth remembering, it's worth writing down." The cold outside called to me, not in a poetic sense, just in that practical way. Air feels clearer when you need to breathe without choking on old emotions. I stepped out onto the porch. The night was black, full of that dense winter silence where even wind holds its breath. I stood on the steps, arms crossed, thought about the time I stayed up with Celeste when she had the flu, cooling her fevered skin with a damp cloth. Thought about how she clutched my hand when Margaret was slipping away, how she said, "Don't let her go alone, Daddy." I didn't. Now she wanted me managed like a liability. My heart didn't race. It settled, like a man watching his field catch fire after years of drought. Nothing to do but let it burn. Somewhere between grief and betrayal. There was a strange peace in knowing the truth. I walked back inside. The air felt heavier, like it knew what I knew. I passed the guest room. The door was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it closed. Not a slam, just enough to signal I knew. I didn't lock it. I wanted them to wonder why. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the shadows stretching across the floor. They didn't just open my briefcase tonight. They'd opened something else entirely. A door they wouldn't be able to close, not without finding me on the other side, waiting. I didn't speak to anyone the next morning. Not Celeste. Not Travis. Not even Brenna, who shuffled into the kitchen just after dawn, bleary-eyed and still half in her dreams. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long while, listening to the quiet. It wasn't peace. It was something colder, something watchful. I skipped breakfast, let them wonder. I put on my coat and walked the block, hands deep in my pockets, shoulders hunched against the organ cold. A fine mist clung to the air, just heavy enough to settle in my bones. I passed the neighbor's house with the plastic reindeer, its nose half lit, flickering like it was giving up. I stopped at the corner where the church bell used to ring, now just a rusted spire holding silence. It was hard to remember what Christmas used to feel like, when Margaret would bake too much and worry too little, when Celeste was still someone I could read like a poem, not a court transcript. By the time I returned, the house was still hushed. I slipped off my shoes by the door and moved toward the attic. I hadn't been up there since the spring after Margaret passed. She always called it her quiet room, told me not to move anything inside, said it was her sanctuary, her place to think. I pulled the cord. The stairs creaked as they dropped, and the dust greeted me like an old dog. I climbed carefully, step by step, heart pounding harder with each rise. The air was musty, but not unpleasant, like time had folded in on itself and made room only for her. In the corner, under a faded quilt, sat a wooden chest I recognized from our first home. It still had the sticker from our move to Eugene in '83. I ran my fingers along the edge before lifting the lid. Inside were Margaret's journals, leather-bound, her name etched faintly on each cover, and a single envelope on top. Cream-colored, hand-addressed. For Lowell, if I'm gone and something breaks. I sat on the attic floor, cross-legged like a boy, holding the letter in both hands. Her handwriting was unmistakable. She used a fountain pen, always said ballpoint made thoughts feel cheap. I couldn't open it yet. Not immediately. My hands trembled too much, and my throat wouldn't let go of whatever lump was rising inside. Instead, I closed the lid gently and carried the letter downstairs. I set it on the mantel, beside the photograph of her in the garden, holding Brenna as a baby. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee and walked out back to the cedar tree. The ground was wet, and the wood of the old bench soaked through my pants. But I didn't care. I stared up at the branches and remembered that final week at the hospital. Margaret had pulled me close, eyes glassy from pain meds, and whispered, "Don't let money decide who you are. Not even if it means losing them." I'd promised her. I had said, I won't. But promises made in hospital rooms are easy. They float. They don't weigh anything until you have to carry them later. I took the letter from my coat pocket, broke the seal, and unfolded it slowly. "Lowell," it began. "If you're reading this, it means something's gone wrong. I always believed you'd be the one who held everyone together, even when I couldn't anymore. But if Celeste, if she ever treats you like a burden, like a problem to be solved, then listen to me. Protect yourself, even from her, especially from her." The words didn't feel angry. They felt prepared, like Margaret knew this moment might come and had written me a map out of it. I loved her, I still do, but love without boundaries isn't care, it's surrender. You don't owe them your silence. Lowell. I folded the letter again, pressed it flat, and held it in my lap. I didn't cry. There was no use for tears anymore. I sat there until the wind chilled the edge of my fingers, then returned inside. Celeste and Travis were gone when I came back through the back door, off running errands. I assumed. Brenna was upstairs, probably still asleep or pretending to be. I didn't want conversation. I wanted quiet, real quiet. So I made myself a sandwich and took it out to the garage, where Margaret kept her gardening tools. It smelled like soil and oil, comforting in a strange, earthy way. I sat on the old folding chair, balancing my plate on my knee, chewing slowly. The difference between her warmth and their calculation felt so sharp I could have drawn lines with it. Celeste used to bring me dandelions in her fists. Now she brought printed emails about my competency. I finished lunch, rinsed the plate, and walked to the study. Opened the safe, tucked Margaret's letter inside, locked it. "If she thinks I'm weak," I said aloud, to no one in particular, "she learned nothing from her mother." I sat down at the desk, pulled out my address book, and flipped through until I found the name. Maribel Klein, Margaret's old attorney friend from the historical board. Trustworthy, quiet, tough as nails. I picked up the phone. When I got back from my walk, the house felt arranged, not cleaned or decorated, arranged, as if every object had been measured, considered, placed just so. Even the silence sat differently, anticipating something. I hung up my coat, passed the entry mirror, and looked at my own face for a moment. I didn't look tired. I looked steady, which, I suppose, was something. Celeste was in the kitchen, fiddling with her phone. She looked up, not quite smiling. "Dad, can we do a quick family Zoom this afternoon? Just to check in with everyone." Her tone was too light, too prepared, like she'd rehearsed it. "With everyone?" I asked. "Yeah, Aunt Linda, Gary, some of the cousins, even Mitch. Just a quick chat. Holiday stuff. Holiday stuff, right." I nodded. "Sure." An hour later, I was sitting at the dining table, laptop open, camera pointed. The call filled with squares, faces I hadn't seen in years, floating in digital boxes like postcards sent from parallel lives. They waved, smiled. Some were clearly distracted. But there, in the corner, was a man I didn't recognize. Trim suit, bland smile. "This is Daniel," Travis said, too smoothly. "Friend of mine. Financial planning. Just thought he could share a few tips for elder security. You know?" My jaw didn't move, but something behind my eyes tightened. Daniel nodded politely. "Just general ideas. Things families should think about when elders have significant assets and want to protect their legacy responsibly." Celeste chimed in. "We've all seen the stories, right? Folks get taken advantage of. It's heartbreaking. I watched their mouths move, the script playing out. Questions were asked, not to me, but around me. Who helps manage decisions? What are the risks of solo banking? How do we define capacity? I sat back, let them talk, let the noose knot itself. They didn't see me, not really. They saw what they wanted, an old man drifting toward irrelevance. I knew better. The call ended with a round of holiday cheer. Everyone waved again. Even Daniel, the stranger, threw in a "Take care, sir." Dinner came not long after. Celeste set the table. Travis poured wine like it was a celebration. Brenna stayed mostly quiet, eyes darting between plates and phones. And then it happened. Travis lifted his glass. "Before we dig in, I prepared something," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. A little holiday joke. He reached into his pocket and unfolded a sheet of paper. "I call it the mock will, just for laughs." Celeste didn't stop him. "To my dearest daughter Celeste," he began, in a falsely formal voice, "I leave the majority of my vast fortune for her loyalty and enduring patience, to her husband Travis, well, obviously, for his unwavering guidance and superior sense of humor. I leave everything else." Brenna didn't move. Her fork stayed planted in her mashed potatoes. "To extended family," he continued. "You get what's left, after taxes, of course." He looked up, smirking. "Too soon?" I stared at him, then at Celeste, who offered a tight-lipped smile. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just reached for my wine, sipped it slowly, and set the glass down with precision. Later, as plates were cleared and the room returned to small movements and half-muttered remarks, I looked at Travis and said, "You know, humor has a way of peeling back the curtain. The things we say in jest, they've already been thought through." Celeste tried to laugh. "Dad, come on, it was just a joke. But every joke lands somewhere," I replied, and this one landed hard. We finished the meal in silence, not the companionable kind, the courtroom kind. That night, I sat at my old writing desk, opened the notebook I hadn't touched in years, and flipped to a fresh page. The pen moved slowly at first, then faster. "The first sign of war," I wrote, "is when laughter stops sounding like love." I closed the notebook, flipped to the contact list beside it. Under R, I circled one name, Maribel Rhodes. The phone stayed off the hook beside me, receiver still warm from the last call. But tomorrow, that dial tone would find a number, and someone would answer. I woke earlier than usual, the kind of waking that doesn't feel restful, just necessary, like my body had somewhere to be before my mind could catch up. I shuffled into the living room in my slippers, the floor cool beneath my feet. Instinctively, I turned toward the corner by the front window where my armchair had always waited for me. It wasn't there. In its place stood a spindly plant in a white ceramic pot and a beige ottoman I'd never seen before. I stood there, one hand hovering over where the backrest used to be, a space lived in for decades, where I read the paper every morning, where Margaret used to bring me coffee. Gone. No warning, no mention, just gone. Celeste came into the room behind me, tying her robe. "Oh," she said, glancing at the empty space. "We moved it yesterday. It didn't match the rest of the space." Didn't match. Like an old sock or a cracked tile. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice not to break something in that moment. Instead, I nodded and turned to the kitchen. Later that morning, while dusting, I noticed something else. A new photo frame on the mantel. And it was recent. Brenna's graduation, I thought. But as I stepped closer, my breath caught. I wasn't in it. Not cropped at the edges, removed, cleanly, like I'd never been standing there next to Celeste. She walked by again, glancing at what I was staring at. "Oh, they only had room for the kids and us," she said, breezy like she was commenting on the weather. "You understand." I didn't. I didn't understand how a man could live in a house for 30 years and suddenly feel like a guest. I didn't understand how I could pay for the roof, the groceries, the car in their driveway, and still be the piece that didn't match. At lunch, I brought it up. I hadn't planned to. But something in me refused to sit down and eat with that framed erasure hanging behind me. "Why am I not in that photo?" I asked, setting my fork down with care. Travis looked up, his smile polite. "Don't take it so personally, Lowell. It's just framing. You know, for balance." "Framing's never just about borders," I said quietly. "It's about choosing who belongs inside them." Celeste opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Brenna pushed her chair back, whispering that she had homework. I didn't stop her. Celeste finally said, "You're being dramatic. It was just a photo." I didn't argue, but I didn't back down either. I finished my meal in silence, each bite harder to chew than the last. That evening, after they'd all retreated to their corners of the house, I went to the garage. I dug through Margaret's old cedar chest, the one she always said was just full of odds and ends. I found an album she'd hidden there, our family, in glossy prints and faded colors. There was one of me holding Celeste the day we brought her home. I looked 20 pounds lighter and 100 years younger. I taped it to the fridge. Below it, I wrote in thick black marker, "I was here." The next morning, it was gone. Not on the floor, not in the trash. Gone. I didn't ask. Instead, I went to the safe. It still creaked when opened, the way it always had. Inside, I pulled every folder I'd ever stored. Bank statements, college fund transfers, car insurance paid in full. Every dime I'd ever pushed their way over the last 20 years. I laid them out on the dining table like pieces on a chessboard. I had ignored the game long enough. Now, I needed to remember how to play. I woke up early on December 28th, the chill from downstairs creeping through my slippers. The message from Brenna was still fresh in my mind. I unlocked my phone to clear the fog of sleep and saw it again. "Mom says you're acting selfish. I don't want to believe her. Please stop making this harder for everyone." My chest sank. That wasn't anger, it was confusion. My granddaughter caught between them, echoing Celeste's framing of me. They were now using Brenna as leverage. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My breath caught, my own child planting doubts in her daughter's head. I felt the weight of years insisting I remain quiet. But something gave that morning. Something told me I had to act. Later. I walked to the guest room closet carrying old albums and documents, memories Margaret had stored over the years. But the door wouldn't budge. There was a new electronic lock. I pressed my hand against the wood, feeling the cold refusal. When Celeste appeared in the doorway, I asked why. She said lightly, "To keep delicate things from being damaged." I nodded slowly. That room held her scent longer than anything else, I said. You sealed it off like she was clutter. She shrugged and left. The door remained shut and silent. It wasn't about protection, it was about erasure. That night, I retreated to the garage. Its single bulb flickered. I sat on a folding chair, surrounded by shadows, thinking about how Margaret built that room during chemo. She chose curtains, paint, and arranged photos with care. It was her sanctuary. I had respected it without entering. Now it was locked behind code and denial. The betrayal drilled in deeper. I pulled out my phone gallery and found an old voicemail from Margaret, saved but never listened to. Pressing play, her voice came through mellow and firm. If they try to erase you, remind them where they came from. Her words echoed in the dark garage. I felt the loneliness and the clarity fuse in one moment. I swiped contacts until I found Maribel Rhodes, Margaret's closest friend. I dialed, hands steady, voice measured. I scheduled to meet tomorrow. It wasn't emotion anymore. It was strategy, returning inside. I paused at the locked closet. I pressed my palm flat against the door, feeling the cold steel beneath my hand. You built this with love, I whispered. They've barricaded it with ambition. That night, I finally opened the safe in my study. It clicked open like a safe haven. Inside, I gathered what I needed. Tomorrow, I'd meet Maribel. And after that, this silent war, behind locked doors and whispered messages, would be faced head-on. The phone call came just before breakfast. I almost didn't answer. Scammers have been getting smarter lately, but the name on the screen was familiar. Barry Marks, the old neighbor who moved to Bend last spring. Lowell, he said, hesitating. Hey, man, are you doing okay? I paused. I think so. Why? He cleared his throat. Well, Celeste posted something on Facebook yesterday. A long one. Kind of sounded like, I don't know, like maybe you were struggling? Emotionally? Financially? She didn't name names, but people know. After we hung up, I sat with my coffee cooling on the table. Then I opened my old Facebook account. It took 3 tries to remember the password, and there it was. Celeste's post was long, wordy, and sickly sweet. Caring for aging parents is a sacred challenge, but it's harder when their paranoia puts their safety, and ours, at risk. She'd tagged photos, one of our driveway, another of the safe, blurred, but unmistakable. Comments poured in beneath. You're so strong, Celeste. It's hard when they fight help. Let us know if you need anything. My hands didn't tremble, not this time. I just clicked Save Page As, then started taking screenshots. Every comment, every reply, every misplaced concern disguised as support. They're building a narrative, I said aloud, before I even file a thing. That afternoon, I bundled the screenshots into a PDF and emailed them to Maribel Rhodes with one line. Let's move forward. Later, in the kitchen, I reached for the coffee tin behind the old spice rack. As I pulled it out, I noticed a faint blinking green light coming from under the shelf. At first, I thought it was the microwave display, but it blinked again. My eyes narrowed. There, nestled behind a ceramic mug, was a small black device, barely larger than a thumb. I traced the cord. It wasn't plugged into anything I'd installed. A discreet home surveillance camera. I didn't say a word. Just unplugged it carefully, dropped it into a paper bag, and wrote across it in thick Sharpie, "Return to sender." Then I set the bag right on the hallway table, perfectly visible. Dinner that evening was oddly tense. Celeste poured wine like a hostess at a charity event. Travis carved the roast with exaggerated grace. Brenna barely touched her food. "Did you find everything okay in the kitchen?" Celeste asked lightly. I met her eyes. "I returned something I didn't know I had." Travis stopped cutting. Brenna's fork clinked against her plate, and she quietly excused herself. No one said another word. I chewed slowly, listening. Not for warmth or love anymore, but for strategy, slips, missteps. They thought they were winning. That's what made them sloppy. After dinner, I sat down at my computer. I opened a new document and titled it, Evidence Timeline. I began with December 25th, the night the briefcase fell open. Then December 26th, the whispers through the ceiling, the printed email. December 27th, the missing chair, the cropped photo. December 28th, the locked memory room. And now, surveillance, public narrative shaping. I logged each detail with timestamps, screenshots, dollar amounts, overheard comments, one folder for each. I typed out a final header in bold, narrative versus truth. I leaned back and stared at the screen, for the first time in weeks. I didn't feel like a man being cornered. I felt like a man drawing his line. The community center smelled like varnish and lemon-scented floor cleaner. I arrived early, just like I used to for PTA meetings or town halls back in the day, back when my presence was expected, even respected. Tonight, I wasn't on the guest list. Celeste had organized the meeting under the guise of elder care awareness. I was just attending. I took a seat near the back, behind the row of stackable chairs, and out of direct line of sight. The posters along the hallway walls were freshly printed. One read, "Financial Justice for Families." Another showed an elderly silhouette with the words, "Protect your parents from themselves." I let out a slow breath. They weren't even hiding it anymore. People filtered in. Faces familiar but cautious. I watched Celeste take the front. She wore the look of someone preparing for sainthood, polished, poised, rehearsed. Travis stood beside her, arms crossed, nodding thoughtfully like some expert witness waiting for his cue. Celeste began, her voice clear through the portable mic. Caring for an aging parent is one of the most emotionally taxing journeys a family can face, especially when they resist help, especially when their decisions begin to put their own security and the family's at risk. She clicked the projector remote. Photos appeared, bills, highlighted bank statements, then a handwritten note that made my breath stop. "I'm scared he's not okay. Brenna." But that wasn't Brenna's writing. I knew her loops and angles like my own signature. This was fabricated. I looked around. Some audience members nodded. A woman muttered, "So sad." Someone clapped. And then, without moving a muscle, I pressed the small remote in my pocket. The sound system crackled for half a second before my recording took over. The room fell to a hush. First Travis's voice came through, casual and low. "If we get guardianship, we control it all. The house, the funds, then Celeste. He won't know the difference. We say it's for his safety. The bank will back us." Gasps. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Travis shouted, "What is this?" I stood slowly and walked to the front. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. "You gave them a show. I figured they should hear the encore." The moderator looked at me, then at Celeste. Is this real?" I ignored the question. I opened the small folder in my hand, unfolded pages one by one. $45,000 for Celeste's college, paid in full. No repayment ever asked. $200 in temporary help checks to Travis over 4 years. Again, no repayment. Celeste sat down. "And still," I continued, "they call it selfish when I say no. I don't call that selfish. I call it clarity." The silence was sharp. A woman in the front row turned to her husband and whispered, "They owe him everything." Travis stood up, then sat back down. I didn't gloat. I just closed the folder, left it on the podium, and walked out. In the hallway, I pulled out my phone. The number was already queued. "Maribel?" I said. Once she answered, "We're not backing down. Next step, court." I woke before the sun, not because I wanted to, but because my mind wouldn't allow rest. The house was still, thick with the tension of the night before. My phone blinked on the kitchen counter like a stubborn conscience. Missed calls, texts. "Sorry you felt ambushed. I didn't know what to believe until now. Call me when you're ready." I wasn't ready. I let the messages sit. Coffee brewed behind me. But I didn't drink. Instead, I stared at the photo Margaret took the spring before she passed, me trimming the hedges, shirt too big, grin too wide. She'd framed it without asking, said it reminded her who I was outside grief. Now it reminded me of how long I'd been fading from my own life. At 7:14, I stepped onto the porch to let the air remind me I still existed. That's when I saw the envelope. No stamp, no name, just a plain, creased rectangle tucked beneath the mat like someone had changed their mind mid-delivery. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, the pocket watch. Margaret gave it to me the night Celeste was born. A father should mark time, she'd said. I hadn't seen it in months. Thought I'd misplaced it. But no, they'd taken it. There was no note, no explanation, only silence. And yet, that silence screamed Brenna's name. Only she would understand what this meant, what it cost to return something without permission, without words. It wasn't betrayal. It was confusion, or guilt, or love trying to apologize with one last act of honesty. I placed the watch on the table and stared at it like it might whisper something more, but it didn't. Later that morning, I stopped by the church to drop off paperwork for a community fundraiser Margaret used to support. I overheard them before I even opened the door. "Celeste's having a big gratitude party today," one woman said. "Her way of healing, I suppose, a New Year's fresh start." "She invited half the neighborhood," another replied. "Odd her father's not mentioned once." They didn't see me. I didn't make myself seen. I drove past the house around noon. Cars lined the street. Streamers fluttered on the porch. People clinked glasses. Children ran through the yard. And there, through the front window, was Brenna in a yellow dress Margaret once sewed for Easter. There was no chair set aside, no framed photo, no trace of the man who helped buy that house. I didn't park. I didn't honk. I drove on. It wasn't rage that filled me. It was something colder, heavier, something that wrapped around my ribs and whispered, "See, you were always temporary." Back home, I passed the hallway mirror and, for the first time in days, looked. Not to check the lines on my face or the way my eyes had aged since Margaret died. I looked to see what was left, who was left. And for once, I didn't see the villain they painted. I saw a man who paid every tuition, filled every fridge, signed every check with a steady hand and a hopeful heart. "I see a man who gave everything," I murmured to the glass, and they called it control. I reached for the legal envelope on my desk. Anderson v. Anderson. Inside, timelines, receipts, letters I never intended to send. On top, I placed the watch. Then I opened my laptop and clicked send. Finally, I picked up the phone. "Brenna," I said when the line connected. "You don't have to say anything. Just listen." The email came just after sunrise, its subject line polished and vague. "Let's move forward." I didn't recognize the tone. It was clipped, dry, as if written by a PR intern trying to manage damage. The first line opened with, "Dear insert dad's name." I didn't read the rest. My laptop clicked shut with the kind of finality a slammed door used to have. I muttered into the quiet, "They're still treating me like a checkbox." A bitter laugh followed me to the coat rack. January light filtered through the blinds in those thin gray ribbons that make everything look colder than it is. I had errands, things normal people still had to do, refill prescriptions, pick up canned soup, keep breathing. Margaret would have told me to take care of myself first. She always said the body leads where the mind doesn't want to go, at the pharmacy. I waited patiently behind a young mother wrangling twins. The clerk, a teenager with a polite smile and tired eyes, asked for my card. I handed it over without thinking. Beep, then a pause. It's saying there's a freeze on the account." "Sir," he said quietly. "Do you maybe want to try another card?" People in line behind me shifted. I slid a 20 from my wallet. "Cash is fine." As I took my bag, I spotted a familiar face near the greeting card section, Mrs. Finch's nephew, phone held at chest height, angled just so. I didn't say a word, just walked out, spine straight. The video surfaced hours later. Of course, it always does. Posted in the local Eugene Watchdog Facebook group, a short, blurry clip captioned, "Should he still handle his finances?" Comments rolled in like ants to sugar, half of them speculating on dementia, the other half praising Celeste's bravery. I stared at the screen until the words blurred into shapes. Then I stood, grabbed my coat, and drove straight to Maribel's office. She didn't greet me with sympathy. She greeted me with strategy. "They've filed a partial impairment claim," she said, pushing a document across the desk. "Backdated doctor's letter. But, look here, the signature. That physician retired last July." She dialed her phone, speaker on. The former doctor picked up on the third ring. "Absolutely not," he said when she read the letter. "That's not mine." "This is moving into criminal territory," Maribel said, hanging up. "Are you ready to file the full countersuit?" I nodded once. I was ready the minute they filmed me buying aspirin. She opened a folder labeled Phase 2. Afterward, I didn't drive home. I went to the cemetery. I stood at Margaret's grave, fingers pressed to the cool granite. "They didn't just try to take my money," I whispered. "They tried to erase who I am." I pulled a folded page from my coat pocket and read it aloud. My statement, the one I would soon submit publicly in court filings. Being old doesn't make me less. It makes me exact. I remember every loan I gave, every school trip I covered, every time I let them walk away without a thank you. I did it because love made me generous. But love doesn't make me blind, and age doesn't make me disposable. There were no birds in the air that day, just clouds, low, solid, unmoving. Back home, I placed the statement on the desk next to the lawsuit envelope. Then I walked to the window. Celeste's car was parked across the street, engine idling. She didn't get out, didn't look up. I didn't wave. I didn't blink. The envelope waited beside the teapot, warm steel tucked beneath paper. I picked it up, felt the weight of it, not just legal but emotional, generational, and I walked slowly toward the front door. The confirmation email arrived at 8:07 a.m. I didn't rush to open it. I already knew. But there it was, in plain font. Legal service completed. Financial freeze lifted. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. For the first time in weeks, the curb in front of my house was empty. No idling engines, no shadowed glances. Just frost on grass and silence. Not peace, readiness. A clarity that no longer required explanation. I didn't have long to settle into that stillness before the phone rang. Celeste's name appeared on the screen. I answered. Her voice was careful, like someone balancing on a tightrope. "We should talk. Not as litigants, just family." "We stopped being just family," I said. "The moment you forged my voice." Silence. "I didn't," she started, then stopped. "Can we meet? Neutral ground?" I told her I'd meet her at Maribel's office. That way, we could all be honest, with witnesses. The waiting room smelled of lemon cleaner and legal consequences. Travis came too, looking like a boy caught with a matchbook in a scorched garage. Maribel didn't waste time. She laid out a folder, tab after tab, loans, tuition payments, bank statements, saved emails. Then she slid a final page across the table. The witness statement that claimed Lowell was mentally declining, it's already been retracted under penalty of perjury. Celeste blinked once. Lowell folded his hands. "You forgot to count the cost of character," Travis spoke, voice low. "We never meant for it to go this far." "But you did," I said. "You meant for it to go exactly this far. You just didn't plan for resistance." Celeste inhaled sharply. "What if we drop the petition? All of it. No contest. Quiet resolution." "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here for receipt." They didn't answer. The next part came without words. They stood. They left. I didn't. Afterward. I drove across town to the church where Margaret used to volunteer. The community board had been updated since Christmas. There, under laminated photos of food drives and candle vigils, was a recent printout titled, "Honoring Those Who Serve." Celeste stood front and center, arms crossed, smiling bright. The caption called her a legacy. Underneath, someone had labeled the man in the corner, me, as distant uncle. I reached into my coat, pulled out a small slip of paper, and slid it behind the frame. 4 words, scrawled in ink. Not distant, just disowned. That night, the mailbox had something waiting. No return address. Inside was a notarized statement from Gloria, the woman who had once claimed I wandered into her yard confused. In tight handwriting, she wrote, "They paid me. I'm sorry. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I placed it atop the folder on my desk, tapped it twice, then whispered, "Now we go all the way." The judge didn't need to raise her voice. Her eyes did the work. When Maribel placed Gloria's notarized confession on the bench, followed by the bank statements, then the audio clips, the courtroom air thickened, not with noise, but with consequence. Travis tried not to twitch. Celeste barely blinked. The petition to declare me incompetent was not only denied, it was referred for criminal fraud investigation. The judge's gavel didn't slam. It tapped. Once. That was all it needed. Outside the courthouse, I didn't speak to anyone. Reporters hovered. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years watched from across the street. I walked past them all and straight to the bank. Mr. Hallstrom, my banker, already had the folder open. Still wished to proceed with the beneficiary change. Mr. Darnell. Yes, I said. The foundation's name is Margaret's Garden. He nodded. Would you like to attach a message? I thought for a moment. Yes. Print this under the seal. My legacy is not a house. It's a warning, and a beginning. The money they tried to claim as their right would now serve strangers with no stake in my downfall. That Margaret would have liked. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. Celeste. I don't want to argue, she said. I'm just asking, honestly, if there's any way back. There's no map, I said, for returning to the truth once you've tried to rewrite it. She didn't answer. Then a small sound, like a swallow or a held breath. She would have hated this. I didn't deny it. Take care of your daughter better than you took care of your father. I hung up. Evening came with a dry wind and a slow ache in my knees. I pulled on my boots and stepped into the backyard. The cedar sapling stood where I'd marked the soil a day earlier. A tree for memory, for growth, for Margaret. I dug quietly, scooping old earth into the bucket beside me. The hole deepened, the ground giving way slowly, stubbornly, just like healing. Footsteps behind me. I didn't turn, but then I saw the second shovel. Brenna. No words, just her hands in gloves, her shoes muddy, her face a portrait of something between guilt and grace. She knelt beside me and began digging. You don't need to explain, I said. Not today. She didn't try. The root ball settled into the ground. We packed soil around it, slow and firm. Some things break, I said. Some things grow back, if you water them right. She looked up and nodded, eyes damp, but steady. Later that night, I stood at my study door. Inside, every folder, every statement, every note from Margaret had been filed into the cabinet labeled Legacy, not Liability. On the nightstand, her watch sat ticking. This time, it didn't measure what was lost. It measured what held. Christmas Day. My daughter discovered I had millions. Her husband wanted it all.